my college reunion party, I saw my ex-girlfriend and remembered how she always chose partying and drinking instead of spending time with me, only to find out she's now pregnant, living in poverty without the father. Hey everyone, my name is Madison, and there's something I need people to understand about Tyler and me. He was mine before he was anyone else's. That's the thing people don't grasp when they look at where I am now and try to piece together my story. We weren't just some casual high school fling that burned out after graduation. We were everything to each other. We were the real deal. Tyler would walk me to every single class, carrying my books like some old-fashioned gentleman from a movie. He'd wait by my locker between periods with that stupid, adorable grin plastered across his face, like seeing me was the highlight of his entire day. I'm talking about the kind of love that makes your friends roll their eyes and complain about how disgustingly happy you are all the time. The kind where you can't imagine your life without the other person, where every plan you make automatically includes them. We had mapped out our entire future together with the naive confidence that only teenagers possess. Tyler was going to attend community college and study something practical, maybe business or engineering. I don't remember the exact details now. I was supposed to get my degree in marketing or communications, something that would give me a solid career foundation. After we both graduated, we'd get married and buy a house right there in our hometown. The whole package, white picket fence, 2 kids, maybe a golden retriever running around the backyard. Looking back now, God, we were so incredibly naive. We thought love was enough to make everything work out perfectly. We thought having a plan meant the plan would actually happen. We had no idea how much life could change you, how much distance and opportunity and simple human nature could reshape everything you thought you wanted. The problem that ultimately destroyed everything was money. It's always money, isn't it? That's the root of so many broken dreams and shattered relationships. Tyler's family was struggling financially, and I mean really struggling, not just complaining about having to budget for vacation money. His father worked construction whenever he could find jobs, which wasn't nearly as often as they needed. The work was inconsistent, seasonal, and dependent on the local economy. His mother cleaned office buildings in the evenings, coming home exhausted with her hands raw from chemicals and her back aching from hours of bending over desks and scrubbing floors. Don't get me wrong, they were genuinely good people with strong values and work ethics. They treated me like family from the moment Tyler brought me around. But the harsh reality was that they simply couldn't afford to send him to any of the fancy colleges that guidance counselors kept pushing on students with good grades. Community college was their only realistic option, and even that would require Tyler to work part-time to help cover expenses. Meanwhile, my father owned 2 successful auto repair shops in town and had been throwing college brochures at me since my sophomore year. These weren't just local schools. He was talking about universities I'd never even heard of, prestigious places with impressive reputations and even more impressive price tags. You're not wasting your potential at community college, he'd lecture me whenever the subject came up. He said it like staying with Tyler and attending the local school would somehow ruin my entire life, like I'd be throwing away some incredible opportunity that might never come again. The pressure from my family was relentless. They painted this picture of all the amazing experiences I'd miss out on, all the connections I wouldn't make, all the doors that would remain closed if I didn't take advantage of my advantages. Eventually, I picked a school 5 hours away because it had a strong program in my field. But if I'm being completely honest, part of me chose it because I was curious about what else might be out there. What was I missing by staying in our small town? What kind of person could I become if I stepped outside the only world I'd ever known? Tyler was incredibly supportive of my decision, which was so typical of him. Of course he was. He'd always been that way, always putting my happiness and dreams ahead of his own concerns. You should go, he told me with that genuine smile of his. It's only 4 years and then we'll have the rest of our lives together. The way he said it made it sound so simple, so manageable. Just a temporary separation before we could start our real life as adults. We made all these promises to each other before I left. We'd talk every single day, no matter how busy we got with classes and work. We'd see each other on weekends whenever it was financially possible, taking turns making the 5-hour drive. We'd write letters, actual handwritten letters, because it felt more romantic and personal than just texting all the time. We had this whole plan mapped out for staying connected despite the distance. For the first month, we followed through on every single promise we'd made. I'd call him every night without fail, sometimes talking for hours until my roommate would start giving me annoyed looks from across the room. I'd tell him everything about my new life, my professors and their quirky habits, my roommate's endless drama, how terrible the dining hall food was compared to home cooking. He'd share details about his instructors at community college, his part-time job at the local auto parts store, and how his mother was handling the stress of their financial situation. It all felt completely normal during those early weeks. Yes, we were physically apart, but emotionally and mentally, we were still completely together. We were still us, just temporarily separated by geography. I truly believed we could make it work, that love would be enough to bridge the distance until we could be in the same place again. But then things started changing in ways I didn't expect and couldn't have prepared for. My roommate Katie was always going out to parties, always meeting new people, always dragging me along to social events I'd never experienced back home. "You need to experience college," she'd insist whenever I'd try to decline her invitations. "You can't just sit in your room talking to your high school boyfriend every night. This is supposed to be the best time of your life." At first, I resisted Katie's constant invitations and pressure to socialize. I was perfectly content staying in our dorm room, talking to Tyler for hours, and focusing on my coursework. But slowly, almost without realizing it was happening, I started saying yes to her suggestions, just to a few parties here and there, just to meet some new people and expand my social circle, just to have some harmless fun and experience what college social life was actually like. The guys at college were completely different from Tyler in ways that both intrigued and unsettled me. They carried themselves with a confidence that Tyler had never possessed, not arrogance exactly, but this self-assured way of moving through the world that came from privilege and opportunity. They had money, real money, not the kind of paycheck-to-paycheck existence that Tyler's family knew. They knew about things I'd never even heard of: wine regions, exotic vacation destinations, cultural references that went completely over my head. These college guys would take me to restaurants where I couldn't pronounce half the items on the menu, places where a single meal cost more than Tyler made in a day at the auto parts store. They'd buy me drinks with names I'd never heard of, cocktails that tasted like sophistication and possibility. They'd casually mention their internships at companies I'd seen advertised during primetime television, talking about their futures with the kind of certainty that comes from having connections and opportunities handed to you. I found myself making comparisons that I hated myself for making. Tyler would call me and tell me about his day at the store, how he'd helped some customer find the right part for their old truck, or how his manager had complimented his work ethic. And instead of feeling proud of him like I used to, I'd find myself thinking about Brandon from my economics class, who was interning at some big investment firm in the city, networking with executives and learning about high-stakes financial deals. When I'd come home for visits, Tyler would plan these sweet, simple dates, the same kinds of things we'd always done together. We'd go to our favorite diner, walk around the park where we'd spent so many evenings, maybe catch a movie at the local theater. But instead of appreciating the thoughtfulness and familiarity, I'd catch myself thinking about how Derek had taken me to that rooftop bar with the incredible city skyline view, where we'd sipped expensive champagne and talked about traveling to Europe after graduation. I started going out more frequently, staying out later and later into the night, and not calling Tyler nearly as much as I used to. What had once been daily hours-long conversations gradually dwindled to maybe every other day, then every few days. When he would ask what I was doing with my time, I'd give him vague answers like studying or hanging out with friends. Technically, I wasn't lying. I was hanging out with friends, if you could call them that. But the reality was that I was spending time with guys who clearly wanted to sleep with me, guys who made me feel desired and wanted in ways that felt completely new and exciting. These weren't the innocent, sweet interactions I'd grown accustomed to with Tyler. These college guys knew how to make me feel like I was the most captivating person in any room. They'd lean in close when they talked to me, their attention focused entirely on me like I was the only thing that mattered in that moment. They'd compliment me in ways that made my heart race, not just telling me I looked pretty, but making me feel sophisticated, worldly, irresistible. By the time Christmas break rolled around, I had become a completely different person from the girl who'd left for college just a few months earlier. I'd been hooking up with guys at parties, sometimes more than one in the same week. The guilt I'd initially felt about betraying Tyler had gradually faded, replaced by this intoxicating sense of liberation. I felt like I was finally living, finally discovering who I really was underneath all the small-town expectations and limitations I'd grown up with. But when I stepped off that plane and saw Tyler waiting for me at the airport with a bouquet of flowers, and that same sweet, genuine smile I'd fallen in love with years ago, I felt physically sick to my stomach. The contrast between who I'd become and who he still thought I was hit me like a punch to the gut. How could I possibly tell him what I'd been doing? How could I explain that I'd discovered this whole other version of myself? This person who craved excitement and novelty and experiences he could never provide. I couldn't bring myself to confess any of it. The words just wouldn't come. So instead, I pretended that everything was exactly the same as it had always been. I went through all the motions of being his devoted girlfriend, holding his hand, kissing him hello, listening to his stories about community college and work. But inside, I was counting down the days until I could return to school, back to my real life, back to the freedom and possibilities that awaited me there. Hey, this is Tyler's side of the story, and I need to tell you what it was like watching the person I loved most in the world slowly slip away from me. I knew something was seriously wrong by Valentine's Day. You don't love someone for 3 whole years and not notice when they start pulling away from you, when their entire energy shifts toward you. Madison would call me less and less frequently, and when she did call, the conversations felt forced and distracted. She'd text me back hours later instead of immediately like she used to, always with some excuse about being busy with schoolwork or spending time with friends. When she came home for breaks, she seemed like she was physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely. She'd sit right next to me on the couch or across from me at dinner, but I could tell her thoughts were miles away. It was like she was going through the motions of being my girlfriend while her heart and mind were completely elsewhere. I tried everything I could think of to make our relationship work and bring back what we'd lost. I'd drive those 5 hours to surprise her on weekends, showing up at her dorm with her favorite coffee from the local shop back home and those little pastries she'd always loved from the bakery downtown. But instead of being happy and excited to see me like she used to be, she'd seem annoyed and irritated, like I was interrupting something important or intruding on her new life. Her roommate would give me these strange, uncomfortable looks whenever I visited, like she knew something significant that I didn't. It was this knowing expression that made me feel like everyone was in on some secret except for me. I started feeling like I was fighting desperately for someone who didn't want to be fought for anymore, like I was holding on to something that was already gone. By spring semester, our conversations had become basically dead and lifeless. She'd call me maybe twice a week if I was lucky, and when she did, she'd tell me about her day in this flat, bored voice that made it clear she was just going through the motions. Then she'd always find some excuse to get off the phone quickly. She had to study. Her friends were waiting for her. She was tired and needed to sleep. I'd try to plan special things for when she came home for visits, putting thought and effort into creating moments that might remind us both of why we'd fallen in love in the first place. But she'd cancel our plans at the last minute with flimsy excuses, or show up late without any real explanation, or spend the entire time we were together constantly checking her phone like she was expecting something more important than whatever we were doing. I felt like I was dating a complete stranger who just happened to look exactly like my girlfriend. The Madison I'd known and loved seemed to have been replaced by this distant, distracted person who was physically there but emotionally unavailable. Every interaction felt forced and uncomfortable, like we were both playing roles in a relationship that had already ended, but nobody had officially announced it yet. The breaking point came during spring break, and I'll never forget how that week unfolded. She was supposed to spend the entire week with me. We'd planned it months in advance, and I'd been looking forward to having that uninterrupted time together to maybe reconnect and figure out what was happening to us. But she kept making excuses to leave early from whatever we were doing, or making plans to go out with old friends from high school instead of spending time with me. On the last night of her break, we were supposed to have dinner at this restaurant we'd been going to since junior year of high school. It was our place, somewhere that held all these good memories from when things were perfect between us. She showed up 30 minutes late without calling to let me know she was running behind, and when she finally arrived, she seemed rushed and distracted. But the worst part was listening to her talk throughout that entire dinner. She spent the whole meal telling me about some guy named Derek, how he'd taken her to some fancy restaurant in the city, what kind of car he drove, what his internship was like, what his future plans were after graduation. I sat there in stunned silence, listening to my girlfriend describe another man's life in detail, going on and on about his accomplishments and his lifestyle like she was trying to make me understand how much better he was than me. I realized in that moment that she wasn't even pretending to care about me anymore. She wasn't even trying to hide the fact that her attention and admiration had shifted to someone else entirely. That's when I knew I had to make the hardest decision I'd ever faced in my young life. That night, I made the most difficult decision I'd ever had to make in my life. I couldn't keep pretending this relationship was working when it clearly wasn't anymore. I couldn't keep begging for attention and affection from someone who had already emotionally moved on to other people. I couldn't keep torturing myself by holding on to something that was already over, even if neither of us had been brave enough to say it out loud yet. So I called her the next morning and told her we needed to talk face to face. My heart was pounding as I dialed her number, knowing that this conversation would change everything between us forever. We agreed to meet at the park where we used to go during high school, the same place where we'd spent countless afternoons just talking and dreaming about our future together. We sat on the exact same bench where we'd had our first real heart-to-heart conversation 3 years earlier, back when everything felt possible and love seemed like it could conquer any obstacle. She knew exactly why I'd asked her to meet me there. We both did. There was this heavy silence between us that said everything we were both too scared to put into words. I could see it in her eyes, not sadness or regret, but something that looked almost like relief. Like she'd been waiting for someone to finally acknowledge what we both knew was true. I told her as gently as I could that I could see she was done with us, that our relationship had run its course, and we were both just going through the motions at this point. I explained that I wasn't going to keep fighting for something that was already over, that it wasn't fair to either of us to drag this out any longer when her heart was clearly somewhere else. She didn't even try to argue with me or deny what I was saying. She didn't make any promises to try harder or suggest that we could work things out if we just put in more effort. She just sat there looking relieved, like I'd finally given her the permission she'd been waiting for to stop pretending she still wanted to be with me. That was it. 3 years of my life, 3 years of plans and dreams and promises just gone like that. After we said our awkward goodbyes, I threw myself completely into school and work, using every ounce of energy I had to avoid thinking about what I'd lost. I started learning everything I could about computers and programming, staying up late into the night teaching myself coding languages and working on projects that challenged me in ways I'd never experienced before. It turned out I was actually pretty good at it. I had a natural aptitude for logical thinking and problem solving that I'd never known I possessed. That's when I started really noticing Jessica for the first time. She'd actually been in our graduating class since freshman year, but she was one of those quiet, studious students who didn't stand out in a crowd or draw attention to herself. She wasn't the type of girl who commanded the room when she walked in or had guys constantly asking her out. She kept to herself mostly, always focused on her studies and her work at the campus bookstore. Jessica worked part-time at the bookstore to help pay for her tuition, and she always seemed to have her nose buried in some book during her breaks. She wasn't reading the assigned textbooks for classes. She'd be reading novels, poetry collections, philosophy books, things that had nothing to do with her coursework, but everything to do with her genuine curiosity about the world. She had this quiet intelligence that you only noticed if you took the time to really pay attention to her. But once I started paying attention, I realized she was actually kind in a way that was rare and authentic. She wasn't performing kindness to get something in return, or to make herself look good. She was genuinely caring and thoughtful in her interactions with everyone around her. She had this way of listening when you talked to her that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered, like she was truly interested in understanding your perspective rather than just waiting for her turn to speak. We started talking more after a computer science class that we both happened to take during spring semester. I'd initially enrolled in the class just to fill an elective requirement, but Jessica was there because she had this genuine fascination with how technology worked and how it could be used to solve real problems. She was funny in this dry, unexpected way that caught me completely off guard. She'd make these subtle observations about our professors or classmates that were hilarious but never mean-spirited. As we spent more time together, I discovered that Jessica was incredibly smart about things that had absolutely nothing to do with school or academic success. She'd read more books than anyone I'd ever met, and she could talk about movies, music, art, and ideas in ways that made me think differently about everything. She introduced me to authors I'd never heard of, films that challenged my assumptions, music that opened up whole new emotional landscapes I didn't know existed. Dating Jessica felt like coming home after being lost for a long time. She actually wanted to be with me, not because I was convenient or familiar or safe, but because she had actively chosen me. She chose me every single day, and that choice felt deliberate and meaningful in a way I'd never experienced before. We'd study together for hours in the library, our textbooks spread across the table while we helped each other work through difficult concepts and assignments. We'd cook simple meals together in her tiny apartment kitchen, experimenting with recipes we found online and laughing when our attempts at sophisticated dishes turned into complete disasters. We'd watch terrible movies on her old laptop, the kind of B-grade horror films and cheesy romantic comedies that were so bad they became entertaining, and we'd spend the entire time making jokes and commentary that was infinitely more entertaining than whatever was happening on screen. Jessica made me feel like I was enough exactly as I was. I didn't need to pretend to be someone else or try to impress her with things I didn't have. I didn't need to worry about competing with other guys who had more money or better prospects or more sophisticated experiences. She saw value in my work ethic, my loyalty, my genuine desire to build something meaningful with someone I cared about. With her, I felt appreciated for the qualities that actually mattered in a long-term relationship. We got married 3 years later, right after we both graduated from college. It was a small ceremony with just our families and a few close friends. Nothing fancy or expensive, but it felt perfect because it was authentically us. We didn't need a big production or an elaborate celebration to make our commitment feel real and meaningful. What mattered was that we were choosing to build a life together based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values. After the wedding, we moved to Boston because I'd received a job offer at a tech company that specialized in developing software solutions for small businesses. Jessica found work at a small but prestigious publishing house where she could use her love of literature and her sharp editorial skills. We both wanted a fresh start somewhere that was completely ours, a place where we could create our own traditions and memories without the weight of our past experiences hanging over us. Boston felt like the perfect choice for beginning our married life. It was a city with history and culture, but it was also forward-thinking and full of opportunities for young professionals like us. We found a small apartment in a neighborhood we could actually afford, and we spent our weekends exploring museums, trying new restaurants, and walking through different parts of the city to get a feel for where we might want to put down more permanent roots eventually. Meanwhile, back to my story. I thought I was living my absolute best life during those college years. That's what I kept telling myself anyway. Every time I'd wake up in someone else's bed, every time I'd delete another guy's number from my phone after a few weeks of casual dating, every time I'd catch myself wondering what Tyler was doing back home. Freedom felt absolutely intoxicating at first, like I'd been released from a cage I hadn't even realized I was trapped in. I could do whatever I wanted, be with whoever I wanted, make any choice that appealed to me in the moment with no questions asked and no one to answer to. College felt like this incredible buffet of experiences and opportunities, and I felt like I'd been starving my entire life without even knowing it. There was Nathan from my American literature class, who had that dangerous bad boy thing going on that made my heart race every time he looked at me. He was always riding his motorcycle to campus, leather jacket and all, and he was constantly getting into arguments with professors about assignments he thought were pointless or outdated. Being with him felt rebellious and exciting in a way that my relationship with Tyler never had. Then there was Kevin, this trust fund kid whose family had more money than I could even comprehend. He'd take me to expensive restaurants where a single appetizer cost more than my family spent on groceries in a week, and he'd buy me jewelry like it was absolutely nothing. Just because he liked how it looked on me, or because it was a Tuesday, and he felt like being generous. With Kevin, I got a taste of what life could be like when money was never a consideration, when you could have anything you wanted without worrying about the cost. And Brandon was this smooth talker who seemed to know exactly what to say to make me feel like I was the most important and captivating person in any room. He had this way of making conversation that made me feel sophisticated and worldly, like I was finally becoming the kind of woman who belonged in elevated social circles. He knew about art and wine and literature, and he'd take me to gallery openings and wine tastings where I felt like I was getting an education in how cultured people actually lived. I'd rotate between all of them, sometimes seeing 2 or 3 different guys in the same week without any of them knowing about the others. They didn't know about each other, and honestly, I didn't care whether they found out or not. I felt powerful and desired and completely in control of my own destiny. I felt like I was finally discovering who I really was underneath all that small-town girlfriend persona I'd been playing for so many years. Tyler seemed like a lifetime ago, like some naive version of myself that I'd completely outgrown and left behind. When I thought about our relationship at all, it felt like remembering a childhood friendship, sweet and innocent, but ultimately something you move past as you become a more sophisticated, experienced person. But here's the thing about living like that. It catches up with you eventually, no matter how invincible you feel in the moment. By senior year, I was getting a reputation around campus, and not the kind of reputation that opens doors or earns respect. Girls would whisper when I walked by in the dining hall or across the quad, their conversations stopping abruptly when they noticed I was within earshot. Guys would approach me at parties like I was easy, like I was automatically available for whatever they had in mind, treating me less like a person they wanted to get to know and more like a sure thing. I started feeling less like I was the one making choices and more like I was being chosen by whoever happened to want me that particular week. The power and control I'd thought I had over my social life began to feel like an illusion. If that makes any sense, I'd gone from feeling like I was in charge of my own destiny to feeling like I was just drifting from one situation to the next without any real agency or purpose. That's when I met Ryan, and he seemed different from all the others in ways that made me think maybe I could turn things around. He was older than the typical college guys I'd been involved with, a graduate student working on his PhD in psychology who seemed more serious and stable than anyone I'd dated before. He carried himself with genuine confidence rather than the performative arrogance I'd gotten used to, and he seemed like he might actually be looking for something real and meaningful rather than just another casual hookup. We started dating exclusively, which felt like a huge step for me after years of juggling multiple casual relationships. For a few months, I genuinely thought I'd found my person. Someone who could give me both the sophistication and worldliness I'd come to crave, plus the stability and commitment I was starting to realize I actually wanted. I was ready to settle down with someone who seemed worthy of that kind of commitment. I was ready to be someone's girlfriend again, to build something lasting with a person who appreciated both who I'd become and who I wanted to be. Then I missed my period 1 month. Then I missed another one. By the time I finally worked up the courage to buy a pregnancy test and face whatever reality was waiting for me, I was already 8 weeks along. I sat in that bathroom stall staring at those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, and my first thought wasn't about the baby growing inside me, or my future, or any of the important life-changing implications of what this meant. My first thought, the one that hit me like a punch to the stomach, was a single devastating question: whose baby is this? The reality of my lifestyle over the past few years crashed down on me all at once. Even though Ryan and I had been exclusive for a few months, the timing meant there was a chance, a very real, terrifying chance, that this pregnancy could be from someone else entirely. I sat there trying to do the math in my head, counting backwards through weeks and dates, trying to figure out exactly when this had happened, and with whom. Ryan didn't take the news well when I finally found the courage to tell him. Actually, that's putting it way too nicely. He took it absolutely terribly. He basically accused me of trying to trap him into something he'd never signed up for, like I'd gotten pregnant on purpose to force him into a commitment he wasn't ready for. He said he wasn't ready for kids, that this wasn't part of his plan, that having a baby would derail everything he'd worked toward in his graduate program. When I told him I wasn't sure that terminating the pregnancy was what I wanted to do, that I needed time to think about all my options and figure out what felt right for me, he got angry in a way I'd never seen before. He accused me of being manipulative and selfish, of trying to ruin his life for my own emotional needs. He said I was being irresponsible and unrealistic about what raising a child would actually involve. That conversation was the end of our relationship. Just like that, the man I'd thought might be my future, the person I'd believed could offer me both love and stability, was gone. I was facing the biggest decision of my life completely alone, with no partner to help me think through the options or support whatever choice I ultimately made. Lily was born in September, and she was absolutely perfect in every way that mattered. She was tiny and pink and completely, entirely mine in a way that nothing else in my life had ever been. Looking at her for the first time, holding her small body against my chest, I felt this overwhelming surge of love that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. But being a single mother turned out to be nothing like what they show you in movies or television shows that romanticize the struggle. The reality of single motherhood was exhausting, isolating, and financially terrifying in ways I'd never anticipated. Every day felt like an uphill battle just to keep up with the basic necessities of caring for a baby while trying to build some kind of sustainable life for both of us. My parents helped when they could, but they made it crystal clear that this was my responsibility, my choice, and therefore my consequence to deal with. They loved Lily, but they weren't going to enable what they saw as the result of my poor decision-making over the past few years. I managed to get a job at a marketing firm in town, which felt like a small victory after months of interviews and rejections from employers who seemed skeptical about hiring a single mother with no real work experience. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to cover rent on a small apartment and basic expenses if I was careful with every penny. I found a babysitter who could watch Lily during work hours, which ate up a significant portion of my salary, but was absolutely necessary if I wanted to maintain any kind of employment. I tried my best to build some kind of life for us, but it felt like I was constantly playing catch-up with responsibilities and obligations I'd never learned how to handle. The years blurred together in this exhausting routine: wake up early, get Lily ready for daycare, work a full day at a job that demanded more energy than I had to give, pick up Lily, make dinner, give her a bath, read her a bedtime story, put her to bed, then collapse on the couch in complete exhaustion. I'd see other mothers at the playground with their husbands, and I'd watch them take turns pushing swings or chasing toddlers around the equipment while they chatted casually about their weekend plans or their children's development. I'd feel this hollow, aching sensation in my chest as I observed what partnership in parenting actually looked like. What would it have been like to have someone to share the load with? What would it have been like to plan this pregnancy with someone who wanted it as much as I did? What would it have been like to do this with someone who loved me and was excited about building a family together? Dating as a single mother turned out to be an absolute nightmare that I was completely unprepared for. Guys would seem genuinely interested in getting to know me until they found out about Lily, and then suddenly they'd become too busy to return my calls or texts. It was like mentioning my daughter was some kind of relationship death sentence that immediately disqualified me from being worth their time or attention. The few men who didn't seem bothered by the fact that I had a child usually wanted to move way too fast, like they were trying to play house with my life rather than actually getting to know me as a person. They seemed to want the instant gratification of a ready-made family without putting in the actual work of building a genuine relationship with me first. I went on maybe 8 dates total in 6 years, and absolutely none of them went anywhere meaningful or promising. By the time Lily started school, I was tired in a way that went far beyond physical exhaustion. I was bone deep, soul-crushing tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix and coffee couldn't touch. I'd look at other women my age when I was dropping Lily off at school or picking up groceries, and I'd wonder how they all seemed so put together and content with their lives. They had this glow of happiness and fulfillment that I couldn't even remember feeling anymore. I'd scroll through social media occasionally and see girls from my college graduating class posting pictures of their perfect husbands and their perfect houses and their perfect family vacations. And I'd feel like I was watching a movie about the life I was supposed to have lived. Everyone else seemed to have figured out the secret to happiness and success, while I was just trying to make it through each day without completely falling apart. That's when the reunion invitation arrived in my mailbox, 12 years since we'd all graduated and supposedly started our adult lives. The envelope was addressed in that generic corporate font that immediately screamed, "Mass mailing." And for a moment I considered throwing it directly into the trash without even opening it. But something made me hesitate. Made me tear open the envelope and read about this opportunity to reconnect with old friends and see how everyone had turned out after all these years. Maybe it was simple curiosity about what had happened to people I'd once known so well. Maybe it was this desperate loneliness that had been growing inside me for years, making me crave any kind of connection to my past when my present felt so isolating and difficult. Maybe it was just the faint, probably foolish hope that seeing where I'd come from might somehow help me figure out where I was supposed to be going with the rest of my life. I tried to look up Tyler online, but it was like he'd completely vanished from the digital world. No Facebook profile, no Instagram account, no Twitter presence, no LinkedIn page, nothing. It was as if he'd made a deliberate choice to live his life completely off the grid, away from social media and public scrutiny. Part of me wondered if he'd actually done something significant with his life, if he'd moved away from our hometown, if he'd found someone else to build a future with. But a bigger part of me hoped against all logic that he was still single, still available, still the same sweet, loyal guy who used to wait by my locker between classes with that genuine smile on his face. I knew it was probably unrealistic after all these years, but I couldn't help fantasizing about the possibility that maybe he'd been waiting for me somehow, that maybe we could pick up where we'd left off and build the life we'd originally planned together. Meanwhile, Tyler was having his own conflicted feelings about the reunion. I was genuinely undecided about whether to attend the reunion or not. Jessica and I had built such a good thing together in Boston, our own little bubble of happiness where nobody knew our complicated history or cared about who we used to be back in high school. We'd created this life that was entirely ours, free from the expectations and judgments of people who'd known us when we were teenagers figuring out who we wanted to become. But my mother kept bringing up the reunion every time we called home to check in with our families. She'd mention how nice it would be to see everyone again, to catch up with old friends and find out what paths everyone's lives had taken since graduation. She had this way of making it sound like we had some kind of obligation to attend, like we owed it to our past selves to show up and represent how well we'd turned out. So Jessica and I finally decided to make a weekend trip out of it. We figured we could fly back home, attend the reunion on Saturday night, and spend Sunday visiting with our families before returning to Boston. It seemed like a reasonable compromise. We'd satisfy everyone's expectations while keeping the commitment short enough that it wouldn't disrupt our normal routine too much. The reunion was being held at the same hotel where they'd hosted our senior prom, which felt weirdly appropriate but also slightly depressing. Walking into that familiar ballroom brought back all these memories of being 18 and thinking we had our entire lives figured out, when in reality we had no idea what we were actually in for. Everything looked smaller and cheaper than I remembered it being back then. The decorations were the same generic stuff they probably used for every single class reunion. Balloons in our old school colors, blown-up yearbook photos mounted on easels around the room, and a banner announcing our graduation year in that same font they'd used for every school event. I recognized maybe half the people there, and most of them looked exactly like you'd expect them to look 12 years later, just softer around the edges, with more conservative haircuts and clothing that suggested mortgages and car payments and other adult responsibilities. Jessica was handling the whole reunion experience much better than I was. She'd never been to one of these things before, so she found it fascinating in this anthropological way, like she was observing some interesting social experiment about human behavior and the ways people try to reinvent themselves or prove their worth to people they haven't seen in over a decade. She'd watch people corner each other with stories about their real estate businesses or their perfect children, and she'd squeeze my hand when someone would approach us with that slightly desperate energy of someone trying too hard to impress. Jessica had this way of keeping me grounded when social situations became overwhelming or uncomfortable. She'd make these subtle observations about the dynamics playing out around us, pointing out the small absurdities and pretensions in a way that made me laugh instead of feeling anxious about being judged or compared to everyone else. That's when I saw Madison walk through the entrance doors, and I'm not going to lie, she still looked absolutely stunning. She was wearing this elegant black dress that fit her perfectly. Her hair was styled in a way that looked effortlessly sophisticated, and her makeup was flawless in that way that probably took an hour to achieve, but appeared completely natural. But there was something different about her eyes, something tired or desperate that hadn't been there when we were together in high school. It was subtle, but I could see it, this underlying exhaustion or disappointment that no amount of perfect styling could completely hide. She spotted me across the crowded room almost immediately, like she'd been scanning the space specifically looking for me since the moment she arrived. I watched her make her way over to where Jessica and I were standing, stopping occasionally to hug a few people and exchange pleasantries, but never taking her eyes off me for more than a few seconds. It was clear that whatever conversation she wanted to have with me was the real reason she'd decided to attend this reunion. Jessica was at the bar getting us drinks when Madison finally reached the spot where I was standing alone. Tyler. She said my name like it carried some kind of special weight or significance. Like just saying it brought back all these memories and emotions she'd been holding on to. You look amazing, really amazing. Thanks, you too, I replied, because what else was I supposed to say in that moment? She did look amazing, even if something fundamental felt off about the whole interaction. I could tell she was nervous by the way she kept touching her hair and adjusting her dress, laughing a little too loudly at things that weren't particularly funny. Then she started asking questions about my life. What was I doing for work? Where was I living? The normal reunion stuff that everyone asks when they're trying to catch up after years of no contact. Except the way she was asking felt loaded with meaning, like she was fishing for something specific rather than just making polite conversation. I could sense that there was some particular piece of information she was hoping to discover or confirm. I tried to find you online, she said, moving closer to me in a way that felt deliberate and calculated. But you're like a ghost. No social media, nothing. It's like you disappeared completely from the digital world. Jessica and I don't really do that stuff, I explained, maintaining some distance between us. We prefer to keep our lives private, away from all the social media drama and comparison games. Her face changed dramatically when I said Jessica's name. It was just for a split second, but I caught the shift in her expression. This flash of surprise, confusion, and disappointment that she tried to cover up but wasn't quite quick enough to hide completely. I watched her process what I'd just revealed, saw her go through about 5 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds as the implications of what I'd said sank in. Jessica. She repeated the name slowly, like saying it out loud would somehow make it less true or help her understand what she was hearing. Who's Jessica? My wife, I said simply, letting the words hang in the air between us. The word hit her like a physical blow. I literally watched the color drain from her face as she absorbed this information that clearly wasn't what she'd been expecting or hoping to hear. She stood there for a moment, completely speechless, like she was trying to recalibrate her entire understanding of the situation and figure out how to respond to this news that had obviously blindsided her. Your wife, she repeated, like saying the words herself would help her process what I'd just told her. When did you get married? 3 years after graduation, I answered honestly. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to do the math and figure out the timeline. Then she started talking about our past relationship, about how good we'd been together when we were young, about how maybe we'd both been too immature to appreciate what we had, about how perhaps we'd made a mistake in ending things when we did. She moved even closer to me, invading my personal space in a way that felt both familiar and completely inappropriate given the circumstances. She put her hand on my arm with that same casual intimacy we'd once shared, and gave me this look that used to make me forget my own name back when we were together. It was a look that had once had the power to make me do anything she wanted, but now it just made me uncomfortable. Don't you ever think about what could have been? She asked, her voice dropping to that soft, intimate tone she used to use when she wanted something from me. About us? That's when I saw Jessica walking back toward us with our drinks, and the contrast between the two women couldn't have been more striking. Jessica was wearing this simple blue dress that she'd probably gotten on sale at some department store, Nothing fancy or designer about it. She wasn't wearing expensive jewelry or elaborate makeup, but she looked absolutely beautiful to me. More than beautiful, actually. She looked like home, like comfort, like everything I'd built my life around for the past several years. When Jessica caught my eye from across the room, she smiled at me with this genuine, uncomplicated expression of happiness that reminded me exactly why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. There was nothing calculated or manipulative about it, no hidden agenda or expectation. It was just pure, honest affection from someone who chose to be with me every single day. Actually, no, I said to Madison, deliberately stepping back from her hand and creating some physical distance between us. I don't think about what could have been, because I'm completely happy with what is. Jessica reached us just as I finished speaking, and I could see her immediately take in the situation with that sharp intelligence she'd always possessed. She's incredibly smart like that. She can read a room within seconds and understand exactly what's happening without needing any explanation. I put my arm around her waist and pulled her close to me, making it crystal clear where my loyalties and affections lay. "Hey, Madison," I said, making the introduction as normal and casual as possible. "You remember Jessica, right? My wife." Watching Madison's face in that moment was like witnessing someone's entire worldview collapse in real time. I could see her struggling to process not just the fact that I was married, but that I was married to Jessica specifically, someone she'd known in high school but had never considered as any kind of competition or threat. Jessica, fucking Jessica. Of all the people in the entire world, he had married Jessica. I stood there completely stunned, trying to process what I was seeing and make sense of how this quiet, unremarkable girl from our high school had somehow ended up with the man I'd thrown away so carelessly. I kept staring at her, trying to understand how someone I'd barely noticed back then had managed to capture and keep the love that I'd been too stupid and selfish to appreciate when I had it. She looked exactly the same as she had in high school, just older. The same mousy brown hair, the same simple style, the same way of standing slightly behind other people like she didn't want to take up too much space or draw attention to herself. There was nothing flashy or attention-grabbing about her appearance, nothing that screamed, "Look at me," or "I'm special." She was wearing this basic blue dress that probably came from Target or some other discount store, with minimal makeup and no fancy jewelry except for her wedding ring. Nothing about her outfit or appearance suggested wealth or sophistication. She was just ordinary. Completely, utterly ordinary in every way that I was not. "Of course I remember Jessica," I managed to say, forcing a smile that felt like it might literally crack my face in half. The effort of appearing normal and friendly when my entire world was imploding took every ounce of self-control I possessed. "How are you?" She smiled back at me with this genuine warmth that made everything so much worse. There wasn't a trace of smugness or victory in her voice. No hint that she knew she'd won something incredibly valuable that I'd lost through my own poor choices. She wasn't gloating or marking her territory or making any kind of statement about her relationship with Tyler. She was just being nice, the same way she'd always been nice back in high school when I'd barely acknowledged her existence. "I'm great, thanks," she said with complete sincerity. "It's so nice to see you again. You look amazing." She meant it. She actually genuinely meant the compliment, which somehow made everything infinitely worse. If she'd been bitchy or possessive, if she'd made some pointed comment about how happy she and Tyler were together, or if she'd tried to establish some kind of dominance over the situation, I could have hated her. I could have dismissed her as petty or insecure. But she was just being Jessica. Sweet, unassuming Jessica who'd probably never said a genuinely mean thing about anyone in her entire life. That made it worse somehow. If she'd been bitchy or possessive about Tyler, if she'd marked her territory in some obvious way, or if she'd made some pointed comment about how happy they were together, I could have hated her properly. I could have dismissed her as insecure or petty, could have told myself that Tyler had settled for someone beneath him, but she was just Jessica, the same genuinely kind person she'd always been, someone who deserved good things and had apparently been smart enough to recognize and keep them when they came into her life. "We should catch up," I said, though every single word felt like swallowing broken glass. The effort of maintaining this facade of casual friendliness was physically painful. It's been so long since we've all talked. Tyler shifted uncomfortably beside Jessica, and I could see him trying to figure out how to extract both of them from this conversation without being outright rude to me. He was still the same polite, considerate person he'd always been, even in this incredibly awkward situation. Jessica just nodded with that same gentle politeness, probably remembering exactly how things had ended between Tyler and me back in senior year, but still willing to be civil and kind. "That would be nice," Jessica said simply, without any enthusiasm but also without any hostility. We made small talk for a few more absolutely excruciating minutes that felt like hours. They told me about their life in Boston, their jobs, their small apartment, their quiet routine together. No kids yet, but they were thinking about starting a family maybe next year when they felt more financially stable and emotionally ready for that kind of responsibility. Jessica actually blushed when she mentioned their plans for children, and Tyler squeezed her hand in this automatic, affectionate gesture that spoke of years of shared intimacy and understanding. I watched this small exchange between them and wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. This should have been my life. This should have been me standing next to him, talking about our future plans, wearing his ring, sharing those little moments of connection that only couples who truly know each other can have. Instead, I was the cautionary tale standing on the outside looking in. I was the ex-girlfriend who'd chosen excitement and freedom over stability and love, and had ended up with neither. I was the woman who'd thought the grass was greener on the other side, only to discover that I'd traded away diamonds thinking they were worthless glass. I should probably get going, I finally said, unable to stand another moment of this torture. Early morning tomorrow with my daughter. Of course, Jessica said with that same genuine kindness. It was really good to see you again, Madison. I watched their faces carefully during those final moments of our conversation, studying their expressions and body language. I could see the polite distance they were maintaining, the way they were being kind and civil, but definitely not inviting. There was no suggestion that we should all get coffee sometime to catch up properly. There was no exchange of phone numbers or promises to stay in touch. They were happy to see me in the way you're happy to see anyone from your past, but they didn't need me in their lives. Why would they? They had everything they wanted right there with each other. You too, I managed to say, the words barely making it past the tightness in my throat. As I started to walk away from them, I heard Jessica say something to Tyler about getting another drink, and they moved toward the bar together. I couldn't help myself. I turned back to watch them go, observing how they walked close together with this natural, comfortable intimacy. They just fit together in a way that looked effortless and right. There was no drama, no tension, no complicated history weighing them down. They were simply two people who had chosen each other and were happy with that choice. I left the reunion about an hour later, unable to stand another moment of pretending to enjoy myself or care about catching up with people whose lives had turned out so much better than mine. I drove home through the familiar streets of our hometown, past the house where Tyler used to pick me up for dates when we were teenagers, past the park where he'd told me he loved me for the first time on a warm spring evening that felt like a lifetime ago. As I drove, the reality of what I'd lost hit me with devastating clarity. I had traded all of that, Tyler's unwavering love, his loyalty, his dreams of building a life together, for what exactly? A few years of meaningless hookups with guys whose names I could barely remember, a college degree I'd never finished because I got pregnant, a life that looked successful and independent from the outside but felt empty and lonely as hell on the inside? Jessica had won without even trying, without even knowing there had been a competition. She'd gotten the prize I'd been too stupid and selfish to keep, and she'd probably never even realized that she was getting something I'd thrown away. She hadn't stolen him from me. I'd handed him to her gift-wrapped with my own poor choices and selfish decisions, and she'd been smart enough, wise enough, loving enough to keep him. I was the idiot who'd thrown away diamonds because I thought they were worthless glass. And now I had to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life, watching from the sidelines as someone else enjoyed the happiness that should have been mine.